Hello, this is Roger Dawson. In this session with you, I'm going to talk about one of the most important areas where you can be an effective power negotiator. That's in negotiating an increase in pay with your boss. You've probably heard me say that you can't make money faster than you can when you're negotiating. When you're in a negotiating situation, figure out how long it took you to get a concession, and then multiply that out to a per-hour earning basis. You simply cannot do anything that will make you money faster than being a good negotiator. That's even more true when you're negotiating an increase in pay, and here's why. There isn't a person in this country who couldn't walk into their boss's office and negotiate a $10 a week increase in pay. But that doesn't sound like very much, does it? However, $10 a week is $520 a year. If you're with the company for another 5 years, that's $2,600 you just negotiated in increased compensation, and it probably only took you 15 minutes to do it. $2,600 in 15 minutes? That means that you were earning money at the rate of $10,400 per hour while you were negotiating that tiny increase in pay. Do you realize to be earning that kind of money, you'd have to be making over $20 million a year? There's only a handful of people in the world that are making that kind of money. So negotiating an increase in pay with your boss really is the highest and best use of your time. It's well worth taking some time to plan, to study, and to learn the proper way to do it. That's what we'll talk about in this session. Let's face it, sitting down and negotiating an increase in pay with your boss isn't a thing to which any of us looks forward. It's a tense negotiating situation. It's tense because so many of the personal power factors that I teach in Secrets of Power Negotiating come into play. If you recall, I covered 8 of them in the program, but 4 of them really come into play when you're negotiating for more money. The first one, of course, is title power. You are dealing with someone who has a more powerful position than you, and that tends to be intimidating. The second one is reward power. Because they're sitting there with the ability to reward you, it makes you feel very, very nervous. The third one is coercive power. What if they get angry at you because you ask for this kind of money? What if they even get so upset that they accuse you of lack of loyalty to the company? We're very susceptible to coercive power in this type of situation. The fourth one that's critical is information power. Chances are you're sitting there wondering what they know that you don't know. Is the company in an expansion mode where they're looking for good people to move up in the organization? Or are they downsizing where they're in financial difficulties and looking for ways to cut payroll, maybe eliminating your job? When information is withheld from us, it always makes us nervous. It always makes us uptight. So before you go into the negotiation for an increase in pay, be sure that you've carefully studied the cassette tape in Secrets of Power Negotiating on personal power, so that you understand the elements of power that come into play in a negotiation. When you understand these elements, you'll feel a new surge of self-confidence that will enable you to assertively get what you want and deserve. Let's start out with some basic principles of negotiating for an increase in pay, and then we'll move into some specific gambits that you can use. Principle number 1 is never negotiate with someone who can only say no to you. That's an underlying principle of negotiating, isn't it? There's no point in trying to negotiate a better deal with a store clerk if the store clerk doesn't have the authority to say yes to you. There's no point in negotiating for a loan at a bank with a bank officer who can only say no to you. And the same thing applies with negotiating an increase in pay with your boss. Obviously, you have to go through channels. If your boss is the office manager, it wouldn't be very smart of you to go around her and just walk into the office of the vice president in charge of operations, sit down, and start talking about an increase in pay. However, understand the dimensions of what's going on. If you were only talking to the office manager, and the office manager has to get this increase in pay approved by the vice president, chances are the office manager is working on a very tight budget. There is pressure on her to keep expenses down, and if they feel they can retain you without having to give you an increase in pay, chances are they prefer not to give it to you. That puts you in the awkward situation of having to put pressure on her to get her to take that request for an increase in pay to her boss. Putting pressure on her in this situation very often means threatening to quit in one way or another, and that creates confrontation. which creates bad feelings and gets the office manager down on you, not supporting you. So your first thought should be, can the person that I'm going to sit and talk to about this increase in pay give me an okay right away, or do they have to go to somebody else higher up the company chain of command? If they don't have the authority to give you the increase in pay, then you have three alternatives. Alternative number one is to go over their head. Alternative number two is to request that you sit down with your immediate supervisor and the person who could give you the increase in pay. Alternative number three is to work through your immediate supervisor, but get him or her on your side in terms of getting you the increase in pay. Let's look at each of these three. First, going over your immediate supervisor's head is very dangerous. In most corporations, it will backfire on you. It could always be an option later if you fail to get what you want and you're willing to quit over it. However, in the initial stages of the negotiation, let's rule that one out. Option number two is to request a meeting between you and your supervisor and her boss to discuss this increase. Whether you'd want to do this or not depends a lot on the personality of your immediate supervisor. If she doesn't have a very strong personality, she may actually appreciate the fact that you're willing to go with her and state your case. However, if she's very protective of her department, she may really be opposed to this because she feels she'd be losing some power over her department. I suggest that you consider the personality of your immediate supervisor, and if you're not sure how she'd feel about this suggestion, just put it to her. Say, what will be the best way for us to handle this? Would you like me to come with you, or would you prefer to go to the boss yourself? The third alternative always seems the best one to me, and that's to work with your immediate supervisor to get her on your side, so she'll sincerely work to get you what you want. To make this work best for you, be sure that you review the higher authority technique that I teach in Secrets of Power Negotiating. There are two counter gambits that are very important here. When your boss tells you that she has to get your raise in pay approved by somebody else, your first response should always be to appeal to that person's ego. You say, but he always goes along with your suggestions, doesn't he? If you've got a boss with a big ego, she won't be able to resist this. She'll say, well, yes, you're right, it's really just a formality. He always does what I want him to do. But sometimes the response will be, oh yes, he normally goes along with my suggestions, but I can't approve it without his say-so. Then you'd go to counter gambit number two, which is to get her commitment that she'll recommend it to the higher authority. And you will recommend this increase to him, won't you? By pinning her down like this, she can only go one of two ways. Of course, the hoped-for response is, well, yes, I think you've earned the increase. I'll do everything I can to get it for you. But in the back of her mind, she wasn't willing to recommend you enthusiastically for the increase. This technique will bring it out. At this point, she'll say, well, frankly, I think he's going to want to see an improved performance from you before he'll approve this. Anytime you can draw out an objection, you're ahead because it gives you an opportunity to answer and counter that objection. So the first basic principle of negotiating an increase in pay is never negotiate with someone who can only say no to you. The second basic principle that applies is that your power in this negotiation is in direct relationship to the alternatives that you have versus the alternatives they have. I'm not suggesting you're prepared to quit over this increase in pay, but to identify who's got the power here, you might want to take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left-hand side of the line, write your alternatives in the event they won't give you what you want. How many other companies are there out there that would give you as good an opportunity or better? On the other side of the line, draw a list of their alternatives in the event that you quit over this issue. How easy would it be for them to replace you? In this way, you can establish how much power you have in a negotiation. The third principle that's important here is the principle of being prepared to walk away. It's the number one pressure point in any negotiation. Oral Hershiser, the pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, was offered $4 million for a 3-year contract. He asked for $8 million, and he got $7.9 million. That's roughly throw the ball and stick $500 in your pocket. Throw it again and stick another $500 in your pocket. What a country. How did he get just about everything he wanted? he projected that he was prepared to walk away. Now, he didn't go to the management of the team and say, "Look, if you don't give me what I want, I'm out of here." Many people negotiate like that, but it's very confrontational, and it creates more problems than are necessary. He was subtle enough to be talking to reporters and saying to them, "Look, don't assume that I'll be back with the Dodgers next year. My contract is up for renewal, and I've had a really good offer from the Japanese. I may go play in Japan for a couple of years." He wasn't going to go play in Japan, and he wasn't going to leave the Dodgers. But what a brilliant opening negotiating position. Recognize that when Orel Hershiser did this, he had just come off an incredible World Series. Any team in the country would have hired him. He was in a very strong negotiating position. Don't try this gambit if you're in a weak position with your company. But if you are in a strong position, it would probably help you to plant a few rumors in the department. Let it get back to the boss that you've had offers made to you by other companies. So those are the three basic negotiating principles that come into play in this situation. First, don't negotiate with someone who can only say no. Second, recognize that your power in the negotiation is your relationship to the alternatives that each side has. And third, realize that the most important pressure point is which side is prepared to walk away from the negotiations if they can't get what they want. Now let's look at specific negotiating gambits that we can use to get you that raise. First, anticipate and preclude objections that might come up in the negotiation. The two standard objections that you're going to hear when you ask for an increase in pay are, 1, the company isn't doing well enough to afford you the increase in pay. And 2, your performance isn't good enough to get an increase in pay. So in your initial conversation with your boss, you should preclude these two possibilities. You might start out with a conversation about how great it is that the company is doing so well and things are happening. Then talk about your performance, a review of the goals that you set a year ago and how you've accomplished those goals and so on. So initially, we want to preclude those two objections from coming up. Number 1, that the company is not doing well enough to give you an increase in pay. Number 2, that your performance isn't good enough to warrant you an increase in pay. The second negotiating gambit is to have the courage to ask for more than you expect to get in the negotiations. If you're hoping to get a 10% increase in pay, you're better off to ask for a 20% increase in pay and then be willing to back down from that position. International negotiators say there are more reasons for putting a proposal on the negotiating table than just getting the other side to say yes. International affairs expert Zbigniew Brzezinski was recently asked about the issue of the Baltic states. Should they be allowed independence from the Soviet Union? He said he thought we should suggest to the Soviets that the European Council be allowed to decide whether they should be independent or not. This astonished the interviewer. He said, but the Soviets would never agree to that, would they? Brzezinski said, well, of course the Soviet Union would never agree to that. I know that. But there are a lot more reasons for making a proposal to the other side than the thought that they might say yes. It expands the negotiating range, and it puts pressure on the other side that wasn't there before. Both principles apply in asking for an increase in pay. When you ask for more than you expect to get, you do put pressure on the other side that wasn't there before. You do expand the negotiating range. But above all, you create a climate where the other person can have a win in the negotiations. When you ask for 20% and then back down to 10%, you'll probably get more than you would have done otherwise. But more importantly, you've allowed your boss to have a win in the negotiation. The third negotiating gambit that really comes into play here is learning to concentrate on the issues. Think of it as a game of tennis. The ball is being batted back and forth across the net. The only thing that affects the outcome of the game of tennis is the movement of the ball across the net. So you concentrate on the ball, not on what the other player is doing. And when you're negotiating for an increase in pay, the only thing that matters is the movement of the goal concessions across the negotiating table. The only thing that matters is, where are we now compared to where we were 5 minutes ago, half an hour ago, yesterday, or last week? In our minds, we very quickly tie how much money we make to our worth as a human being. Because of that, we're in very sensitive territory here. Things may be said in this negotiation that would cause you to get really angry and upset with the other person. It may even cause you to quit on the spot and stomp out. Be prepared for this kind of sensitive issue. Good negotiators don't let themselves get upset in a negotiation. International arms negotiators only walk out of a negotiation as a planned negotiating gambit. The only time they ever allow themselves to get upset is as a planned negotiating gambit. You should take the same approach in negotiating an increase in pay with your boss. Be a good negotiator and learn to concentrate on the issues. The fourth negotiating gambit is the hot potato. Don't let other people give you their problems. If your boss, for example, says to you, "Well, we'd love to give you an increase in pay, but we just don't have it in the budget." Whose problem is that? It's not your problem that they didn't budget effectively for the increase you've worked for and deserved. It's their problem that they didn't budget effectively. So don't let them give you their problems. The standard response I teach in Secrets of Power Negotiating when somebody tries to give you their problem is to test the problem for validity right away. If they say to you, "We just don't have it in the budget," you say, "Well, who would have the authority to exceed the budget?" Remind them that a budget is simply a number written on a piece of paper, and that number can be changed. The fifth negotiating principle is avoid good guy, bad guy. If you were an entertainment star or a sports personality, you probably wouldn't be negotiating your own increase in pay. You'd have somebody else do it for you. And it's much more effective when you can have somebody else negotiate your increase in pay for you, because they probably can be much more forceful than you could, and they also have a resort to higher authority. They can say to a television producer, "I think they'd leave the series rather than settle for that." But they've always got the option of coming back to you and being able to reverse the position because you overrode them. So it's a good thing to have another person negotiating an increase in pay for you, but you're probably not in a position where you can have somebody else do that for you. You're going to have to do it for yourself. What I want you to avoid is your boss playing good guy, bad guy with you, in effect saying, "Well, if it were up to me, I'd give you this increase in pay, but the people I report to are so hard to deal with, so difficult, they just wouldn't approve it." This is simply a subtle form of good guy, bad guy that I teach in Secrets of Power Negotiating. The standard counter-gambit to good guy, bad guy is to recognize what they're doing to you. In a light-hearted way, you simply laugh it off and say, "Oh, come on, Joe, don't play good guy, bad guy with me on this. We both know that if you really went to bat for me on this, you could get me the increase. Now, what's stopping you from giving it your full endorsement? Let's get it out on the table." The sixth negotiating gambit that you should use when applying for an increase in pay is nibbling. Everything is agreed upon. Perhaps you ask for 20% and then settle for a 10% increase in pay. That's an excellent time for you to nibble for a little bit extra. Remember the frame of mind of the other person. He's been through a considerable amount of pressure and tension over this negotiation. Finally, an agreement's been reached. You're shaking hands and he's feeling good. When people feel good, they tend to give things away they otherwise wouldn't. Secondly, when you raise another issue at the very last minute in the negotiation like this, they tend to think, "Oh no, I thought this was all resolved. I don't want to have to go back through this thing again. Maybe I'm better off to give in on this little issue." So this is an excellent time for you to nibble for something more. It may be that you have a company car that's a couple of years old, and it would be good to say, "Oh, by the way, Joe, it really is time we updated the car I drive, don't you think?" You stand a better chance of getting it then than at any other time in the negotiation. Or your nibble may be for a quick review of this increase in pay. Perhaps it's your company's policy that you sit down once a year to review an increase in pay. Because you settled for only a 10% increase when you deserved a 20% increase, perhaps you can say at the last minute, "Joe, look, I was willing to settle for a small increase this time, but don't you think we could review this sooner than next year? Couldn't we sit down and take another look at this 6 months from now?" you've got a good chance of him going along with something that if you'd introduced it earlier in the negotiations, he either would deny you or use as a trade-off. In Secrets of Power Negotiating, I teach 20 negotiating gambits, and they all come into play when you're negotiating for an increase in pay. But here I've highlighted the 6 that are most likely to come into play. 1. Preclude objections that might come up, such as the company not doing well enough to give you an increase in pay, or that your performance hasn't been satisfactory. 2. Ask for more than you expect to get. 3. Concentrate on the issues. 4. The hot potato. Don't let them give you their problems. 5. Avoid good guy, bad guy. And 6. At the end, nibble for something more. There's another thing I'd like you to do before you go in and negotiate your increase in pay. That is to review the 2 cassette tapes in Secrets of Power Negotiating on personality styles. It's very important to understand the personality style of your boss in relationship to your personality style. Are you a pragmatic, an extrovert, an amiable, or an analytical? And how are you coming across to your boss? If you'll listen carefully to those 2 tapes, you'll find it isn't that complicated to figure out where you are on the quadrant and where he or she is. It will make a big difference for you when you go in to ask for more money. Remember that any time you're involved in a negotiation, you always think you've got a weaker hand than you really do. That's just the way things are. You know about the pressure that's on you, you don't know about the pressure that's on the other side. And this is particularly so when you're negotiating for an increase in pay. Chances are you'll be sitting there thinking that you don't have as many options as the company does. What you need to realize is that the reverse is also true. Your boss is probably sitting there thinking, "Boy, I hope he doesn't quit over this. I don't know where I'd ever find a replacement." Your boss probably feels that you have more options than he or she does. One of the things that makes you a power negotiator is understanding that you really do have far more power than you think you do. Good luck in your negotiation for an increase in pay. I'm betting that if you'll listen to this tape several times before you start, you'll do far better than you ever imagined. This is Roger Dawson, and thank you. This is Roger Dawson. Welcome to this special session on how to negotiate the very best price on an automobile. Americans probably get more experience in negotiating on car lots than anywhere else. That's because we Americans are not accustomed to negotiating. In this country, when we look at a price tag, we think it's the lowest price for which we can buy the item. Around the rest of the world, they think it's the highest price the merchant will take, and negotiating is a natural part of their lifestyle. In many parts of the world, if you walked into a store and just gave the merchant what they were asking for the item, they'd actually be insulted. They'd think, "Aha, a stuck-up American, huh? Think you're too good to negotiate with me, do you?" In this country, it isn't part of our lifestyle to negotiate the price of something, with 2 exceptions. The first exception is with real estate. We're expected to negotiate the price of real estate when we buy or sell. The second is when we buy an automobile. And with real estate, we usually employ a real estate agent to do the negotiating for us, so that leaves the automobile dealership as the battleground for negotiating in this country. In some ways, I feel sorry for the poor car dealer. He's in about the only business in this country where people come in determined that they're going to get the very best price they can. On the other hand, while we may buy an automobile every 2 or 3 years at most, the dealer gets to negotiate the price of automobiles day in and day out. They have 100, 1,000 times the experience that the typical car buyer does in negotiating. What I want to do with this session is just level the playing field by giving you some tips and skills that you can use when you next negotiate the price of an automobile. It will compensate you for all that extra experience the car salesperson has. These techniques will work for buying from an individual also. Let's start by looking at what would be the perfect customer for the car dealer. What would make the car dealer do cartwheels if they saw this person coming across the parking lot? What would make them think they died and gone to heaven? First, it would be the person who's uninformed. They simply don't know how much cars cost or how much profit the dealer makes. The second thing they'd hope for would be a buyer who's emotionally involved in the purchase. The buyer has seen this car advertised in magazines or on television, and they want one so much they can almost taste it. If they're not emotionally involved when they come on the lot, the car dealer will try to get them emotionally involved by taking them for a test drive and letting them fall in love with the automobile. The third thing that a car dealer would hope for is that the buyer is under time pressure, maybe with a car that's broken down and he needs something to get to work in tomorrow. So that would be the ideal buyer for the car dealer, an uninformed person, emotionally involved with the purchase, and under time pressure. You as a buyer want to be just the opposite. You want to be completely informed. You want to be unemotionally involved in the purchase and under no time pressure. Let's take those one at a time. First, being well informed. You don't have to go much further than your local bookstore to be informed about the dealer's cost on automobiles. Consumer Reports even has a computer printout service where they will, for a small fee, send you an exact printout of dealer costs on the model you're considering. Another simple way to find out the cost of an automobile is to call leasing companies. Leasing companies also sell cars. They won't carry the car in stock, but they'll locate the car for you at a dealer, and you can buy it through them, and they'll get you the best price. So all you have to do is pick up the phone and call 2 or 3 leasing companies and ask them what their lowest sales price is on a particular model, and you'll soon get a good idea of what's possible. Ask them also what the dealer's cost is. They can probably tell you. What makes this easy for you is that they don't expect you to come into their office. They'll give you all the information you want over the phone. For a used car, you can call a loan officer at any bank, and they'll give you a quotation from the Kelley Blue Book. This book quotes retail prices, called High Blue Book, and wholesale prices, which are called Low Blue Book. A dealer tries not to pay more than Low Blue Book and tries to sell at High Blue Book. Your objective should be to buy as close to Low Blue Book as you can. Remember, you're not cheating the car dealer by buying at dealer cost. Car fleet buyers can buy at several percentage points under dealer cost because the net cost to the dealer after factory incentives is considerably below the actual invoice cost from the factory. So your objective should be to buy the car for dealer cost or anywhere up to 5% below actual dealer cost. The second point is to be emotionally uninvolved in the purchase. If you need to do any test driving, set aside a separate day for test driving the automobile and deciding on the model you're going to buy and so on. Then on another day, do your negotiating. Another technique I've used successfully for getting the emotion out of the buying situation is to let the car salesperson know you're buying for someone else, a son or daughter who's not there, or buying for your company and so on. Let them know that the decision on the make and the options has already been made, and you really don't care where you buy it. You're just looking for the lowest possible price. The third point is don't be under time pressure when you buy. Or if you are under time pressure, don't let the dealer know that you are. People under time pressure become flexible, don't they? Your kids know this, right? When do they ask you for something? Just at the last minute, just as they're leaving the house or you're leaving the house. They know instinctively that under time pressure you become more flexible. So don't let time pressure work against you in the car buying situation. Later we'll cover the gambits that you can use against the dealer, but now let's look at some of the negotiating gambits that a dealer may use against you. First, higher authority. Have you ever been on one of those big new car lots where you make a deal with the salesperson and he says, "That's fine, you've got a great deal." And you can't believe how inexpensively you bought the car. He writes up an order blank and says, "Just initial this, please." And you think you've bought the car until he says, "I've just got to run it by my sales manager." A few minutes later, the sales manager comes back looking worried and says, "You know, I'm sorry, we just can't do this. Let's sit down and talk about this because there's no way we can sell you the car for this price. We'd go broke." He negotiates with you for another half hour and gets the price up a little and then says, "Okay, we're all agreed, just initial this." And you initial it thinking that you finally bought the car. It wasn't as good a deal as you expected to get, but it isn't too bad. Then he says, "I just have to get this okayed by the president of the company. I'll be right back." Then lo and behold, somebody shows up who claims to be the president of the company to get a little bit more from you. It's called resort to higher authority. So the game being played here is that the car salesperson doesn't want you to know he doesn't have the authority to make a deal. On the other hand, he wants you to commit that you can make a decision right away. When he takes you out for a test drive in the car, he'll probably say something like, "Let me be sure I understand. Is there any reason you wouldn't make a final decision today if you like this car as much as I know you're going to like it and we can give you the right price?" He doesn't want you to be able to delay the decision by inventing an Uncle Harry or an accountant with whom you have to check before you can decide. So when he asks you for a commitment that you could make a decision, you should trade it off for a commitment from him that he could also make a decision. You might say, "I'm prepared to make that commitment to you, but I'd like to have an understanding that you have the final authority to sell me the car. After we agree on a price, there won't be somebody else with whom you'll have to check." The next gambit the dealer might use against you is good guy, bad guy. I'm sure you've seen the old police movies where the suspect is brought in for interrogation, and the police officer who interrogates the man is an extremely rough and tough guy and threatens the prisoner with all kinds of things he's going to do to him. Then he's suddenly called away to answer a telephone, and the second detective who's brought in to look after the prisoner is a warm, elderly, fatherly type of figure. He sits down, pulls out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, offers one to the prisoner and says, "Listen, kid, it's really not that bad. They're just trying to scare you. Why don't you let me see what I can do for you with them?" If you want to read a fascinating account of this gambit, read Truman Capote's book, In Cold Blood, where the police finally catch the killers and interrogate them in a Las Vegas jail. In its mildest form, good guy, bad guy works like this. The car salesperson sets you up. He's the warm, friendly guy that's trying to help you get the best possible deal for your car. But somewhere in the background is a bad guy, and he keeps referring to him. He keeps saying to you, "I'm going to get the best deal I possibly can for you." Then he comes back and says, "Boy, the boss is really tough to deal with, but I got you the best deal I've been able to get through since I've been working here." The salesperson builds up a warm, friendly relationship with you to the point where you believe that he's really on your side. Of course he's not. He's always on the car dealer's side, but it's easy to get fooled by this. In its roughest form, it works like this. You try to negotiate the deal with the car salesperson, and you can't get together on the price, so suddenly he turns on you. He turns into a really bad guy. He starts yelling and screaming. He says, "You've been wasting my time all afternoon. I don't think you can even afford to buy a car. You probably don't have any money at all." What customers will very often do if they fall for this is say, "Oh, yes, I can, but you'd be the last guy in the world from whom I'd ever buy a car." And you go across the showroom and say, "I'm going to buy the car from this guy." Don't fall for that. The counter gambit to good guy, bad guy is first just to recognize it. If the salesperson uses it on you, you simply laugh and say, "Oh, come on, you're not going to play good guy, bad guy with me, are you?" Usually they'll smile and back off the gambit. The third gambit that's used against you is funny money. There are all kinds of ways of describing the price of something. Aircraft manufacturers don't talk about the tens of thousands of dollars it costs to fly a plane from San Francisco to New York. They talk about the pennies per passenger mile that costs to fly the plane. Salespeople call that breaking it down to the ridiculous. I'm sure you've had a real estate salesperson say to you, "Do you realize we're talking $3 a day here?" You're not going to let $3 a day stand between you and your dream home, are you? Well, $3 a day over the life of a 30-year real estate mortgage is $32,400. It just doesn't sound as much when you break it down to the ridiculous. Don't let the car salesperson talk to you in terms of monthly payment. That's simply disguising the true price of the automobile. Don't let them say to you, "You do want the CD player, don't you? It only costs 40 cents a day." You see, 40 cents a day may not sound like it's enough to spend any time negotiating on until you realize that 40 cents a day over a 4-year contract is $576. That kind of money is well worth spending a little time negotiating a reduced price. The fourth gambit that dealers use against you is nibbling. They know perfectly well that when you walk onto the car lot, there is a psychological resistance that is built up to the purchase price. If they can just get you to the point where you're thinking, yes, I'm going to buy a car, yes, I'm going to buy it here, then they can get you into the closing room and start adding on all the other little extras that really build the profit into the car. Which is why they will first close you on any make and model of car, even a stripped-down one. It's a strange psychological phenomena. Once we've made a decision about something, our mind flip-flops. We've been working against making that decision, but once we make the decision, now we want to do anything we can to reinforce the decision that we've made. You may have done a terrific job negotiating the base price of the car out on the lot, but now you're in the closing room, and they're locating the right car for you. And they say, well, we have exactly the car you want, but it has leather seats. That's not a problem, is it? It's only 35 cents a day. We're very susceptible to that kind of add-on, so look out for nibbling. Now, let's look at gambits that you can use on the car dealer. The first one is reluctant buyer. I can't tell you how many people in my negotiating seminars have told me that at some time in the past, they've walked onto a car lot and fallen in love with a car. The car salesperson has narrowed their choice by getting them to decide whether they want automatic or stick transmission, whether they want leather or velour upholstery, and what color they want. They get them totally in love with the car, and then the buyer expects to negotiate a good price. It simply doesn't work like that. You should always play the reluctant buyer role. You might take the car out for a good long test drive. You come back, you ask all the questions you can possibly think of about the car, and finally you say, well, I really appreciate all the time you've taken with me. You really have been very nice, but unfortunately, this is just not the car I'm looking for. But I thank you very much, and I wish you the best of luck. And you shake their hand and turn away to leave, and almost as an afterthought, you turn back and say, look, I do want to be fair to you because you've spent so much time with me. Just to be fair to you, what is the very lowest price you would take for the car? This is remarkably effective in squeezing their negotiating range up front before the negotiations even start. Would you agree with me that when you're buying a car, the price that the car salesperson tells you is the lowest price is probably not the bottom line? The first number you hear is what they're hoping you'll pay for the car. It's the wish number. Somewhere out there is a walk-away price, the price at which they will not or cannot sell you the car. If you've done your homework properly, you probably know within a few dollars what that walk-away price is. When you play reluctant buyer, they're not going to go all the way from the wish price to the walk-away price. But here's what will typically happen. They'll give away half their negotiating range. When you say to them, just to be fair to you, what is the lowest price you would sell the car for? If they know that they're still $1,000 above the walk-away price, they're probably going to say to you, well, I'll tell you what, if you'll make a decision right now, I'll let you have it for the lowest price we've ever sold this car. I'll give you another $500 off. It gives you a pretty good idea how far you can get them to go if you keep on negotiating. So always use the reluctant buyer gambit. It's a magic phrase. I'm not really interested, but just to be fair to you, what is the very lowest price that you would take? The second gambit to use when buying a car is flinching. Of the 20 gambits I teach in Secrets of Power Negotiating, this probably seems like the dumbest one. However, it's the one on which I get the most mail and phone calls. I've had so many people write or call me and say, I flinched and they immediately came down $500. I couldn't believe it. Flinching means visually reacting to a proposal. When that car salesperson throws that price at you, they may not think for a moment that you're going to go along with it. They're just throwing it out to see what your reaction would be. If you don't appear to be too shocked or surprised, suddenly they start thinking, well, maybe we will get them to pay that much. I never dreamed they would, but they don't seem to be too shocked. I'm going to hang in with this one. I'm going to be a tough negotiator. I'm going to see how much I can get out of these people. Body language experts will tell you that 83% of what you're communicating when you're dealing with someone isn't the words you're saying. It's the combination of the way you say the words and the body language that you use when you say them. That's the importance of flinching. You say, just to be fair to you, what is absolutely the lowest price you would sell a car for? And they say, absolute bottom line is $16,000. And you have a look of total surprise on your face. You bring your hand up to your cheek and you say, $16,000! You'll be amazed how often that will get you a concession from the other side. So be ready to flinch anytime the other side makes a proposal to you. The third gambit that's important in buying an automobile is bracketing. Bracketing means that you position your objective in the negotiations midway between the two opening negotiating positions. Let me put some numbers to that, and it will make more sense to you. The car dealer is asking $18,000 for the car. You want to buy it for $16,000. You need to make an opening offer of $14,000. That sounds awfully low, doesn't it? They're asking 18 and you're going to have the nerve to start at 14? However, it positions your objective of 16 midway between the two opening negotiating positions. Of course, it isn't always true that you'll end up at the midpoint, but boy, is it a good assumption to make if you don't have anything else to go on. Assume that the negotiations will end up midway between the two opening negotiating positions. Most inexperienced negotiators in this country have a split-the-difference mentality. That means that they listen to both opening negotiating positions, and automatically they're thinking, well, if we ended up splitting the difference, could I live with that? So let's say the car dealer is asking $18,000 for the car. You've done your homework, and you know their cost is $16,000, and you could buy it for $16,000. Then you say, $14,000 is about all I can afford. They tend to think, well, what would happen if we split the difference? That would be $16,000. We could live with that. Okay, let's keep negotiating with this person. We've got a live one. Where people go wrong in buying a car is that they don't have the nerve to start that low. The car dealer is saying $18,000, and they're saying, look, I know your cost is $16,000, so $16,000 is what I'll give you for it. Then the car dealer is thinking, oh, what would happen if we split the difference? We'd come out at $17,000. Sure, that'd be great. We can do that. You have to bracket your objective so that your objective in the negotiation is midway between the two opening negotiating positions. The car dealer probably started unrealistically high in the negotiations, so why shouldn't you start unrealistically low? The fourth gambit that you can use on the dealer is the vice technique, V-I-S-E, putting pressure on people. This is a simple little expression. You'll be amazed at what it will do for you, and it's this. Whatever their proposal, whatever their counter-proposal to your proposal, you simply slide it back across the desk and say, I'm sorry, you'll have to do better than that. And shut up! Let them be the next one to talk. The next person to open their mouth will make a concession in the negotiations. Salespeople call this the silent close. You make the proposal and then shut up and let the other person talk next. I once watched two salespeople do the silent close on each other, if you can imagine this. There were three of us seated at a conference table. The salesperson on my right made a proposal to the salesperson on my left, and then he shut up. The salesperson on my left thought, son of a gun, I can't believe this. He's going to try the silent close on me? I'll teach him a thing or two. I won't talk either. Soon we had two strong-willed people staring at each other, daring each other to be the next one to talk. I didn't know how this was ever going to get resolved. It seemed like half an hour went by, but it was probably more like 5 minutes. Finally, the salesperson on my left broke the impasse when he wrote the word decision, ? On a pad of paper and slid it across the table to the other one, but he deliberately misspelled decision. The other person looked at him without thinking and said, You misspelled decision. Once he started talking, he couldn't stop. He went on to say, "Look, if you're not prepared to do what I suggested, I might be prepared to do this." He renegotiated his own proposal before he found out whether the other person would accept it or not. So whatever the proposal or counter-proposal from the dealer, you simply say, "You'll have to do better than that," and shut up. The counter-gambit, incidentally, if you run into a good negotiator, is, "Well, how much better than that would I have to do?" Yet you'll be amazed how often that simple little expression will get you another concession in the price. Finally, I want to make you aware of a technique that car dealers use called four-squaring. It's a technique used all over the country, and once you realize what they're doing to you, it'll make you a much more effective negotiator. The principle of four-squaring means that every car buyer has four concerns, but one of them will be primary. The four concerns are, first, the price of the car, how much you'll actually pay for the automobile. The second concern is the amount of trade-in that you'll receive for your old car. The third concern is the amount of the down payment. And the fourth concern is the monthly payment. In qualifying you, the car salesperson will four-square you. They mentally or maybe even physically draw a box and divide it into four squares. They put each of those elements into a square: price, trade-in, down payment, and monthly payment. They try to figure out which one of these is most important to you. Some car buyers are determined to get the lowest price for the car they buy, but they're not that concerned with how much they get for their trade-in. Other people are very proud of their car that they're trading in, so getting a good value for the car that they're trading in is more important than the price they actually pay for the car. Other people may be more concerned with the down payment. "I've only got $200, can you get me into a new car?" And others will be more concerned with the monthly payment. They can afford the down payment, but they're primarily concerned with keeping the monthly payment within their budget. If the car dealer can identify your area of primary concern amongst those four, they can appear to be giving you what you need in the negotiation, when in fact all they've done is juggle the other three factors. As a power negotiator, you want to appear to be detached from any of these factors. It shouldn't matter to you whether they show a high or a low trade-in for your automobile. What you're concerned about is the lowest net price. And you should have prearranged financing so that you're not involved in negotiating payment terms or the amount of the down payment with the car dealer. Keep that away from the negotiating situation. Being aware of four-squaring and how the car dealer uses it to appear to meet your needs in the negotiation will make you a more powerful negotiator. There's one more thing I want you to do before you go out to buy your automobile. I want you to study the cassette tape on personal power in Secrets of Power Negotiating. On that tape, I cover the 8 things that people can do to you to intimidate you in the negotiating situation, to cause you to blink first in the negotiating process. Understanding those points will make you a better deal in the car dealer's showroom. This is Roger Dawson. I want you to be a power negotiator when you buy your next car. If you study the Secrets of Power Negotiating program in addition to this special session, I promise you that you'll get your investment in this program back many times over.